All right, welcome. My name is John Middleton. I'm the immediate past president of the Optimist Club of Covington. This is our second program in the club's 2018 General Election Candidate Speaker Series. Welcome to our guests here at Pee Wee's Place in Crescent Springs and to our guests viewing on the Telecommunications Board of Northern Kentucky. I want to thank Pee Wee's for providing the location for our event, and I want to thank the Telecommunications Board for taping and rebroadcasting the event to the viewing public. These sessions can be viewed on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. on Spectrum Cable Channel TBNK 203 and Cincinnati Bell Cable Channel 815. Thank you, Pee Wee's, and thank you, TBNK. One of the missions of the Covington Optimist is education and information. With this speaker series, we hope to educate and inform the public on various candidates for public office in the general election in this November in Northern Kentucky. Over the 10 weeks, candidates will speak to us in August, September, and October. First two presentations are candidates for the 65th State House. Jordan Huizinga spoke to us last week, and Charles Buddy Wheatley is presenting today. For those viewing on cable, today is Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. The Optimist Club meets here at Pee Wee's every Wednesday. Pee Wee's is on Crescent Springs. These meetings are open to the public and all are invited to attend. There's no charge except for the cost of lunch that you order off the menu here at Pee Wee's or at the wonderful buffet that Pee Wee's has on Wednesdays as well, which is only $8. The program agenda is I'm going to give the speaker 15 minutes to 20 minutes for their presentation. We're going to take a break for lunch, and during that break, the audience members, and that's one of the advantages of being in the audience here, you get to ask questions to our speaker. So remember the paper in front of you for questions. I'm sure everybody will appreciate that. So after that, he'll take 3 or 4 questions from the audience, followed by a few minutes for closing remarks. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce today's speaker. Buddy Wheatley's 20-year career as a Covington firefighter is part of a family legacy which spans 4 generations. Along with his brother, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, the Wheatley family represents nearly 100 years of firefighting service to the people of Covington. Born on Pleasant Street in the East Side neighborhood, Buddy and his family, which would eventually be a household of 14, moved to Parkway Avenue in West Covington, just a few feet from DeVue Park. After completing grade school at St. Anne's in West Covington, Buddy graduated from Ludlow High School in 1979. He received his first BA from the University of Kentucky in 1983, majoring in journalism. A second BA in English from the Northern Kentucky University in 1997. He was an award-winning journalist with the Kenton and Boone County Recorder newspapers before responding to the call for public service, switching careers to join the Covington Fire Department in 1988. Buddy became active in the Covington Professional Firefighters IAFF Local 38 early in his fire department career, eventually serving as secretary-treasurer for 8 years. He then went on to become secretary-treasurer for the Kentucky Professional Firefighters. Buddy finished his firefighting career serving as fire chief of the Covington Fire Department from 2005 to 2008. He then attended NKU Salmon P. Chase College of Law, an institution of finer learning, I might add, while serving as fire chief. So I'm sure that many of those classes were at night. After passing the bar exam in 2009, Buddy launched a career as a solo labor attorney working on behalf of public sector labor unions. He currently serves as union co-chair of the American Bar Association's section of Labor and Employer State and Local Government Bargaining Committee. Buddy takes inspiration from his amazing late mother, Doris Jane Wheatley. While running a household with 12 children, yes, 12 children, and a firefighter husband, Doris managed to work full-time in Covington at the Monarch Tool and Die Company on East 4th Street. Her unalterable commitment to family, faith, and community, and total giving of herself for others are the characteristics Buddy hopes to emulate most as your state representative. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Buddy Wheatley.
thank you. Thank you all, John, and thank you for that introduction. I can move to this just a little bit. And thank you to the Optimist Club for allowing me to speak today and for the invitation. I'm going to pick this up. And for TBNK for being our recording component here, and to the audience that's paying attention at home. You know, I'm one of those 815 channel watchers, and there may not be a lot, but it's a great station. It's good information there, so I encourage it. You know, I'm an optimist, so it kind of makes sense to be here. You know, the creed is something that I took a look at before I got here, and I certainly do appreciate many of the statements on this creed, and I live by it. And another thing that's important to me is the Optimist Club, a bit like myself, is not heavily partisan one way or the other, and that's important too in today's world, as some of us have already chatted about earlier today. It is getting more and more divisive, and that's not one of the reasons why I run. But at least I want to introduce myself to say that I am Buddy Wheatley. I go by Buddy. I will appear on the ballot as Charles Buddy Wheatley, but I've gone from as Buddy since I was a small child, and I received that nickname. I am the junior, or the second actually. I'm Charles Wheatley the second. My father waited to his fourth son for some reason and that gets into the story about my mother, but I am the second, and Buddy came to be an easier name to go by, and especially by my brothers and sisters. And as you have heard, I'm from a very large family. I was a middle child, and as a middle child with 6 boys and 6 girls, there was obviously some compromising and things that you have to be able to do to sort of negotiate your way through that group of people. And it was great fun growing up in a household of that many people. And we like to say, you know, how did my mom spoil 12 kids, you know, working full time and doing all the things that she did? But we kind of look at ourselves that way, you know, at this time. We all feel that way. You know, we were so blessed to have such a blessed mother and an inspirational father too, you know, who took on all of us. We all played sports. We all played all 3 sports. The girls were into cheerleading, which the sports weren't quite as prominent as they are now. My younger sisters did play. I had a sister who went on to play at Thomas More College to play basketball. But you know, it was a fun household to be in, and you know, as we grew up into adults, it might not surprise anybody. There's about a third of us are Democrats, a third of us are Republicans, a third of us are independents, and so it's a very bipartisan group. Though we don't quite get into the discussions that we used to have, say maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And we recognize, even around your table, you probably recognize it's just maybe not the best time to get into discussions about some of the national politics. And that's not quite happening on the state level, but we'll get into that. For some of you, this is probably the first time you've heard me speak, probably maybe the first time you've even seen me. And I'm not a polished speaker. I'm not a politician. As you see, I've already dropped my notes, and I'll flip through them a little bit. I might knock them over again, or I might hopefully we won't be twiddling our thumbs here anytime, but I'll try to keep up and try to keep in time. You know, in my 20 years as a Covington firefighter, I had to kick in a lot of doors and bust some windows to save a life and put out a fire. You know, I made decisions. I had to make decisions that directly affected the lives of people. As a first responder, senior fire officer, fire chief, decisions that I made, I couldn't hesitate. I couldn't hem-haw. I depended on my training. I depended on the people around me who gave me good information, the dispatchers, the police officers, the firefighters on the scene. And I really depended on my best instincts to make those decisions that really have life and death implications. And that's what I hope to do in Frankfort. And that's what I vow to do in Frankfort. I could never do this, you know, to run for office without the tremendous support of my family. And my whole family is involved. They're all local for the most part. My incredible wife, who wanted to be here today but couldn't be here, she works full time, and she's you know, the real breadwinner, but she is incredible. She's a great counselor. She is my advisor, my manager, my scheduler, and inspiration and encourager, and the absolute love of my life. And she's, you know, Dr. Judy Gotze. She's Director of Nursing Research at the Christ Hospital. She has a very responsible job, and she's over there doing those things for nurses. You know, when I graduated from law school, I graduated from law school, and as John knows, you have to take the bar exam. Before I even had my bar results, a Supreme Court case came down regarding firefighters. And as I had planned to be this slow building law practice to, you know, maybe work into as a part-time attorney, as a solo labor attorney, because my passion was firefighters for the most part, but public sector workers. This Supreme Court case comes down about the way firefighters are being paid around the state, and before I knew it, I had dozens of calls before I had my bar results. So there's a little more pressure to make sure that turned out well, and it did turn out well. And that had me in Paducah, and Ashland, and Owensboro, Richmond, Somerset, Ratcliffe, all the areas, all the places around the state to help firefighters come to agreements and this was a very difficult situation where the money wasn't there necessarily in certain cities to pay the firefighters this back pay that was related to their incentive pay. And we worked hard. You have to you know, deal with government agencies when you are talking about firefighters, paid firefighters, and I really had a strong understanding of that coming from the fire chief's position and as a labor leader for the Covington Fire Department. So I had some background in it, and it really did help. And I think those assets and that part of my personality will be helpful as a state representative. I've gone on now, and I currently serve as general counsel for the Kentucky Professional Firefighters. I'll do my And with that has me in Frankfort quite a bit, or at least dealing with legislation, analyzing legislation that affects all the paid firefighters in the state of Kentucky. And as you know, there's been quite a bit, especially with the pension issue. But it's been a real challenge. Sometimes I'll get a 200 or 300-page bill sent to me on a Sunday or on a Friday and say, you know, we need to know what's the effect of this in just a couple days. And unfortunately, and I think everybody here is aware that we've had some legislation that has come through the state legislature, the General Assembly, very quickly. And, you know, it's a concern of mine, and certainly not the way that I would do things if I'm part of leadership or anything that has to do with legislation that's coming through. I like to bring people together, bring everybody to the table, and let's get a compromise plan, get the input from everybody so that we can have a great piece of legislation. That didn't happen, and that's not the way that I will operate, you know, as a state legislator. And, you know, I could tell you that comes from my time as what I do quite a bit right now as a labor attorney is I do collective bargaining. And collective bargaining is about sitting down at the table with your employer and being able to discuss your working conditions and your wages and your benefits. And that, in that case, you know, I have never looked at collective bargaining as our side against their side. We're all in here, the taxpayers, when it's public sector labor organizations you're talking about, it's the taxpayers who are really the bosses out there, and that's who we're all working for. So let's come up with a good package here. Both sides can agree, but both sides have a voice in it. Obviously, the employer, the city, the municipal agency, they have an interest, but the employees, to have that voice is important. And that's what some people feel like is missing in their leadership in the state of Kentucky right now, is not having that voice. They have voted people in to be the representatives for state representative, but they are doing things as the party would do it. And that's not always, you know, what they exactly wanted their elected official to do. And I can tell you that if I get elected as state representative for the 65th district, having been born and raised here, having, you know, raised a family in this district and run a business and been a public servant for 20 years, you know, I will represent all of the district all the time. And that is something that is just a part of me, and I'm a Democrat. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I have my principles that are part of what I stand for, but I'm ready to listen to the good information, the good pieces, the good facts, and make decisions based on the whole district. You know, and part of the work I've done for the professional firefighters has been the pension issue. And of course, we have to figure out a way what to do with the pension issue. And I say that because the bill that was passed, that went through the legislature within 7 hours, has been struck down by the courts. It's been appealed to the Supreme Court, but right now we don't have that pension bill. And we do have a pension crisis in this state. But what I would propose, and what I have talked to in my involvement in this, in my studies related to pensions and public pensions, is that we have a pension funding issue for sure. And Governor Bevin and the majority party, they've been great at dealing with that. It's the part that I don't agree with is what to do going forward. Do we need to get rid of the defined benefit system, or do we need to go to some type of hybrid system or 401k system that much of the private sector has? And I would propose that for many reasons, and certainly can get into it, but we'd be here all day if we did. But many of the reasons that it's very valuable to have a defined benefit system for our public employees. And you can rate that on a level of hazardous duty, teachers, other state workers, other county workers, municipal workers. That can all be factored in. But the best way to deal with this problem, there's the funding issue. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the best way to going forward is to have that option. If we have public employees who want to be in a 401k or some kind of hybrid system, we have that option, and we have the option for a defined benefit. And that's what other states do, and Ohio does something like that. And there are other states that have some type of system that we could, again, we all sit together, and they've been studying, they've been talking about pensions for quite a while. But when this is something that happens in our current state representative in the 65th district is frequent to point this out, is that when you get a majority party who has the level of majority that they have at this time, there's a tendency not to get everybody at the table. And they realize that, this majority may not be this great for very long, so we have to act and act now. And I've seen that before, and it's not just the Republicans who have done this, or the majority party right now. It's happened on the other side. And I never think that that's a good idea. It doesn't lead to good transparency, and it doesn't lead to legislation that will certainly it would be constitutional if we did it the right way of reading that legislation for 3 straight days, as it says in our Constitution very clearly, and we wouldn't have to worry about the court challenges, and we'd have better legislation. So I'll be a big proponent of that. There's other things that I would like to talk about, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about in some of the questions I have no problem with, but I can see lunch is getting closer here, and that's very important. I can tell you at the firehouse, everything stops except when the bell rings. Everything stops when that dinner bell rings, and I'm ready to do that here. I got a couple other things to talk about that are important to me, and I can do that in a wrap-up, but maybe it'll come through with the questions too. So if we're ready, we're ready.
Thank you, Buddy. Reminder, as he reminded you, get your questions here from the audience. We'll take a break for lunch, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to Pee Wee's. We had a...
Jason, are you ready?
No. All right. Welcome back to Pee Wee's. We had a wonderful lunch buffet today, and a wonderful lunch here at Pee Wee's. This is the Covington Optimist Club Candidate Speaker Series. We meet here every Wednesday. We have a candidate for state representative, Charles Buddy Wheatley, and I'm going to ask him to come up. And we have a number of questions, lots of questions for Mr. Wheatley, and he will answer as many as he can, and then he'll have a few minutes to wrap up. So, Charles Wheatley.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So I'll get to the questions right away, and I appreciate all the questions. Some are combined in a bit. So the first question asks, what are your 3 most important issues facing the Commonwealth, and how can they be solved? Well, in my opinion, the 3 most important issues are fully funding our public education system, a fairer tax system, and better labor laws. Those are what I see as the three most important issues. How they can be done, well, fully funding education gets into revenues, gets into priorities, and gets into how we divide up the revenues, and are we taking all of our revenues in. And as some of you might know, and this will be the same answer related to the pension system, the pension issue, is that Kentucky takes in about $11 or $12 billion in tax revenues, but it exempts, or it does not take in, almost the same amount, $11 or $12 billion in tax revenues based on incentives that have been given out. Well, I think we need to do a deep dive into those particular revenues. I'm not in favor of raising any taxes to pay for the pension issue and our fully funding education, but looking at those incentives to see if we can redirect or have those monies go directly into the pensions until they're better funded into education. And education is our greatest economic development program that we could have. Okay, and this gets in. This question gets into the best revenues that we can go to, and it also asks. This is another question about pensions and funding pensions and defined benefits. And there's actually three of them this way. And one is an interesting question that refers to how other states are doing things, and other states are having as much difficulty as Kentucky. Hardly anybody is. You know, people do recognize that Kentucky is perhaps the worst, or Illinois is the poorest funded pensions as we speak today. Now, again, that's funding the pensions obligations. It doesn't speak to what we do going forward. So funding pensions is just part of the obligations that we have every year, and our greatest and our biggest obligation, the most important obligation, in my opinion, is funding education. Now, that's what some legislators thought previously when they didn't fully fund the pension system. And the funding the pension system, we used to hear a lot of different, there was a lot of pointing of fingers in different directions, but it really was that combination of a couple things, or three things. It was the not full funded, as the experts, the actuarial analysis says you should put this amount of money in, the state should put it in. They also had overly optimistic investment numbers that affected that actuarial amount. And the other thing they overestimated, was the amount of growth in the employees that we would have in the state. There was an estimate of 4% growth. And I give the governor credit for pointing these things out. We were too optimistic, and here I am speaking at the Optimist Club. But when it comes to finances, and I think, you know, both sides of the aisle should see it this way, and they need to see it this way. You need to be conservative in your estimations for these particular funding mechanisms and the way you're going to do your pensions, and that created a big part of the problem. So, funding the pensions, yes, we need to find perhaps dedicated funding streams through some of those incentives that we're giving away too much tax incentives. A lot of tax incentives are important and they're good, but we have to review them constantly and consistently to make sure we still need those in that particular business or whatever it is that got the funding. Okay, and that I'm going to get to the bridge and the tolling question. That is something that is fairly easy for me. I am against tolling the bridge. I'm against getting a new bridge as it is proposed. The current proposal, I'm not for it. And there's a couple reasons for it. First and foremost is that Northern Kentucky will be paying most of the tolls for that bridge. If there was a way to exempt a certain zip codes, certain parts of the state, which nobody's talked about this very much, that might be a way that we could do tolling. But then you get into the actual physical building of this other bridge, and the proposal as it stands today would simply devastate too many important areas of the district, my district, the 65th district, and it's not acceptable to me. That's why I do favor at least a deep dive into the other alternative. They call it the Eastern Bypass. I also favor, looking at ways that we can make the current bridge safer and better to use. There's been some discussions about going back to 3 lanes. I wrote an op-ed piece that appeared in one of the newspapers about how dangerous that bridge was. I called it more dangerous to be on that bridge as a firefighter than it was, going into a burning building, because it was scary when you had to respond up there, and there was a number of reasons for that, for first responders, police, and firefighters. And then, can we squeeze it down to more lanes, less lanes? We really need to look at what we can do with the existing bridge, and that even gets into greater transportation issues and looking at the whole Cincinnati area for transportation needs and how we can reroute traffic and do things with traffic. And I'm a big supporter of walkable, bikeable communities. I'd love to have a bikeable bike paths that come all the way down from Florence and Alexandria, that come down to the urban core, and safe bike paths and urban pathways, bike lanes that are all part of the planning that needs to go on with transportation. Again, these are areas, these are things that might reduce the amount of traffic, and we need to encourage the use of other roadways that will lessen the traffic. And the big traffic, of course, is what goes through I-75, and maybe some of the local traffic. We can incentivize it coming off that bridge and that thoroughfare. Okay, those were the tolling questions. And I think I've gotten to, there's a question here. Oh, and there's a question, I'll certainly answer this one. It says, I love Arnold, so you have some big shoes to fill, and I completely agree. That's something that you can certainly see that he's a snappier dresser than I am, but that's not just the big shoes. He's one of the most well-accomplished and well-respected state legislators in Frankfort. I know it. I hear it from other state legislators, and I really look to be able to at least start to fill those shoes. I think we have some of the same characteristics. We have a little bit different backgrounds, but Arnold and I agree in a lot of ways, and he's a strong supporter, and I truly do appreciate that. Okay. Are we okay on time?
We can start wrapping up. One more question.
I have a question of very, very much basic, and it's a good wrap-up, and I can start talking about it. It says, what are your principles? And please, emulate, or please enumerate. My principles come from where we are, what I'm about. I was born, like I said, born and raised in this area. Northern Kentucky is really all I've known. I did go away to school and been back. I've been a newspaper reporter in this area, very familiar with the cities, the county government, the state government, the streets. You can almost name any street in my district, and I can tell you pretty much where it's at and have some connection to it. So my principles are related to the principles of the 65th District and actually Northern Kentucky too. We are a bit of a conservative area, and my time as a firefighter and being involved in the labor movement has moved me a little bit more towards the Democratic Party and the principles that are part of the Democratic Party. But part of even the Optimist Club here is that you try to think of the collective, you think of the whole, and do what you, as an individual, do the best that you can do to make the whole better. And that's just the biggest part of my principle. It's part of what I'll do as a state legislator, because I have to think about all of Kentucky. And we have some very important issues, and we have some big things that are happening here in the district in Northern Kentucky, but Kentucky is the goal here. And education is my number one issue. We know what works in education. We know public education is the answer to many of our questions, many of our problems. But we still have to deal with all of those societal problems that happen that filter in our education system. Everything from making our schools as safe as they can possibly be, providing the kind of the teachers and the transportation for public education, all those ingredients that we need a safe, stable environment to really cultivate our kids, to rise the level of education prominence in this state, that we actually want people to come to Kentucky because they think that this is the place to get a good education. There are good jobs here, and we have a diversified economy, but it can be further diversified, as it does need to be in the eastern part of our state. And that's the kind of state I'm looking for, and looking for the 65th district to be a shining example of. With that, I think I've answered all the questions, unless there's anything else, gentlemen.
You have a couple minutes to wrap up. You want to do a summary or closing?
Well, in essence, I want to thank everybody for being here, of course. I want to thank the Optimist Club. It's really, to get into this position of running for office is something it is new to me. And while it has certain excitement and there's certain momentum building right now, and this is the time when campaigns do start to kick up, it's hard work. I embrace it. I went from being a journalist to a firefighter to an attorney. I practice now as an attorney and going on to politics. There are certain levels in Dante's circles of hell that I'm circling. So I hopefully it goes up from there. But it would be an honor to serve as your state representative, and I look forward to it. I'll work hard every day at it. It's what I do. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy, for coming to speak to the Covington Optimist Club. We appreciate you being here. We've got two great candidates running for the 65th District, so we look forward to that election. Please join us next week here at Pee Wee's on Wednesday at 12 noon for not only a great lunch and great service. We gotta mention our servers all the time. But also great speaker. So thank you.